So the waiting is almost over now. It's up to the starter. Clean start.
I train 6 days a week. I only have 1 day off. I train 6 hours a day. All I do is eat, sleep and train.
Smith is not letting them get away from them, and you can hear the crowd going wild.
I think on some level, I presumed she would fail.
I don't think anybody expected what ended up happening.
100 metres to go for a second gold medal for Michelle Smith. Can anyone catch her at this stage? She's 15 metres to go to the turn.
I think I was just shocked. I think I was in shock.
She will turn for the final 50 in front. Bear in mind, Ireland has never won a swimming medal of any colour, and they're looking at gold.
Absolutely astonishing achievement. And, you know, from the moment that happened then, I mean, the country went absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy.
7 short days in Atlanta propelled Irish sport in general onto an altogether different plane. Ireland's greatest Olympian, Michelle Smith.
My name is Ciarán Lennon, and you are listening to Tainted Gold, the Michelle Smith story, a 3-part series that traces her rise and fall, as well as the deep scars that remain to this day. We asked Michelle Smith to contribute to this podcast, but she said she was not available. She has always denied accusations of cheating during her swimming career, and in a recent statement to RTE Radio, she said her Olympic success was a culmination of 17 years of training and dedication to her sport. On August 6, 1998, 2 years to the day after she had returned to Ireland as a hero, Smith was hit with a 4-year ban for tampering with a drug sample, and a year later she would lose an appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport in what was a bruising experience. Michelle wasn't the only one left with scars. The whole episode had been damaging for almost everybody connected with the saga. For some, the fallout can still be felt 25 years on. It led to bitter divisions between those who covered the story. For the other swimmers in the Olympic pool, they may have swam in different lanes, but their stories were intertwined. And Michelle's gold medal performances would have real consequences for those who finished second in Atlanta.
9-7. Second is Wagner. Third now is Schmidt. Fourth is Overton. Fifth is Lynn.
I won the first one, and I suppose then I got a bit greedy.
Let's see what happens here, because the lead could change hand, and Michelle is holding on, but her final 50.
I also have to acknowledge the support of my husband.
On the breaststroke, coming through now to challenge lane 1, Michelle Smith. In lane 5, Ellie Overton is coming through as well, and lane 4, Marianne Limpert. So it's a very good race. Michelle Smith just...
It was very important going into the Olympic Games that I had the support in the background there, because I was fit, I had done all the work, and I needed somebody there to be able to understand what it takes to win an Olympic medal, and he knew just that.
Four years after Atlanta, Rick Morrissey was working for the Chicago Tribune, but he returned to the story to examine the impact of Michelle's doping violation on both sides of the Atlantic.
I remember she had gone into an Irish bar in Jacksonville, Florida, her hometown, several years after, and there was sort of a shrine to Michelle Smith in there, her success, and Allison Wagner was furious and yelled at the owner of the bar to take it down. And while that was happening, her friends went in and tore down all the photos of Michelle Smith from the bar, and they ended up getting banned forever. She just couldn't believe in her hometown that this, sacrilege, if you will, was in public display.
On the first night of the Atlanta Olympics, Allison Wagner finished second to Michelle Smith in the 400 metres individual medley. It was 1 day before the American's 19th birthday. The great Hungarian swimmer Kristina Egerzegi finished third. Wagner had been a world record holder and an American Swimmer of the Year, but this would be her only Olympic medal of her career. And it was not the colour she had dreamed of.
Like many athletes, my goal was to win the gold medal.
When Allison Wagner was beaten by almost 3 seconds by the woman from Rathcoole, she was left stunned.
I was shocked. It was a surprise to be in that situation. Just a general disappointment to experience the Olympic stage in that way.
And for each gold medal won by Michelle, there would be swimmers left wondering if they were on the wrong step of the podium. Canadian Marianne Limpert was in her second Olympics and had travelled in hope of any medal, but after setting the fastest qualifying time in the morning heats, she had her eyes set on gold.
My initial reaction when I touched the wall and saw that I was second was honestly disappointment. just because I was looking to win the event. And then when I saw that I'd lost to Michelle, who was over in lane 1, then I have to admit it was even a little bit more disappointing too. So just because of the rumors and sort of the controversy that had been swirling in the days before the event.
Allison Wagner found the fallout from Atlanta particularly difficult. She had struggled before the Olympics with anorexia and bulimia, and when her all-consuming pursuit of Olympic gold fell short of her target, her world would fall apart.
It had a huge effect on her. I interviewed her in 2000 when I was working at the Chicago Tribune. She had had a hard time of it. She thought she was going to win a gold medal in that event. And here comes somebody who kind of came out of nowhere to beat her. And so she had had emotional struggles before that. She had dealt with eating disorders. And she told me that she couldn't remember eating for 2 weeks after at the Atlanta Games.
She would seek professional treatment to address her eating disorders soon afterwards, but there were other consequences to missing out on gold in Atlanta.
One of the indirect costs was that I went back to swimming where I had come from at the University of Florida, and I had my scholarship removed for winning the silver, not the gold. I also had just at that point kind of resigned to the fact that it didn't seem evident to me that amount of dedication that I put into competing in sport fairly was mirrored by those in governance and power positions. Athletes need to know that their dedication to fair competition is being protected to the nth degree.
Allison has turned her experience into a positive. She's recently completed a master's degree in sports ethics and integrity and has taken on a role with the US Anti-Doping Agency.
I am dedicating my professional life currently to advocating for and protecting clean athletes and clean sport. Unfortunately, my experiences in sport were not totally positive to the point that they negatively impacted my life significantly. You got to understand that when you're an athlete at that level, sport is your life.
If they had taken away Michelle Smith's medals and given it to them, they still couldn't give them what they had gone to Atlanta for. And that was actually winning in the moment, raising their arms over the head in the pool, looking at their time and saying, yes, I did it. You really can't get that back, it seems to me.
It bothered me for a while after Atlanta, for sure. I kept having these dreams where, I would wake up and everything. Yeah, I was the gold medalist. And right after Atlanta too, I threw myself into school. I started competing and then I just kept going. So I never really had a chance, I guess. In moments here and there, I would kind of stop and think about it, but then I would just keep going. And it probably wasn't until after I'd stopped swimming and in the moments since then when I have a little bit more time to think about it. And obviously every 4 years when the Olympics come around and I do some interviews that I think about it. And I'm like, well, in my heart, I do feel like I had the best swim on that night in Atlanta. And, in the history books and on paper, that's not the case. But that's, for me, that way I have some peace and, I can look myself in the mirror and know that I had a clean performance and I did what I could. And if others feel the same way when they look in the mirror or not, I mean, that's for them to deal with.
Michelle has had a lot to deal with since Atlanta, a point not lost on Marianne.
I can imagine it. It hasn't been easy for her. At the same time, I feel like when you do something like that, I mean, you have to kind of know the risks and know that what could happen. I think at that point, and even just looking at like some of the East Germans, it was coming out some of the health issues that they had. So besides just the risks that you're taking, I guess I would have a little bit of sympathy for her for sure. At the same time, I feel like I don't think when you do something like that, like you're not 100% naive. In that situation, you're not 100% naive. And I think you kind of know. And you just kind of weigh the risks and think that it'll pay off in the end.
In the 2 years after those 1996 games, those who had covered the events in Atlanta had plenty to deal with. The division lines that first developed in Georgia would only grow wider. There was no room for nuance. You were either with Michelle or against her. No one was for turning. And as Paul Howard explains, it would stretch into all corners of their work.
A lot of us fell out with each other, and I remember at press conferences, not even just Michelle Smith press conferences, at other press conferences, football, GA, rugby, whatever it was, the people who were kind of asking questions about Michelle Smith, we all sat in a huddle and everybody else sat in another huddle. And so you could actually see the line, like there were divisions there.
Yeah, well, I think the whole Michelle story definitely, it did scar me in a sense.
That's Vincent Hogan, sports writer for the Irish Independent.
In that it became very, very divisive between journalists. Like, I wouldn't have had a civil word between myself and Paul Kimmage for 15 or 20 years after that. In fact, on the contrary, Paul would be stepping in by me at a soccer international or a rugby international, and he'd make a sarky comment to me, and I'd make a sarky comment back. I was really, really pissed off that it became journalist against journalist. I don't think it should ever have become that. But then I do look back now, and I don't think I really understood how those guys who went after her felt so isolated. And for Paul especially, this was 6 years after he'd written this book, which he got absolutely savaged for in France. And it was a much more personal thing for him than it was for me.
So my own background as a professional cyclist and a professional athlete, I'd seen firsthand what happens when you ask questions about Irish heroes and doping in Irish sport.
That's the voice of Paul Kimmage.
And those Irish heroes were Sean Kelly and Stephen Roach, who had been teammates of mine. And the questions I'd asked of them had been in 1990 when I wrote about Rough Ride and about the issue of doping in cycling. And the backlash then was pretty savage in 1990 after that book was published. And I saw the full extent of what happens when you bring the Irish public a message they don't really want to hear, And this was in 96 then, this was a replay of that. It was, look, there's another side to this story now, folks, that we need to actually look at here. And you probably don't want to hear it. And they did not want to hear it. So that was kind of a reminder, if you want, of something I'd gone through myself and wasn't fully recovered from, I'd say. And that impacted on my writing at the time. And that's why it was different to Eamon. It was different to David Walsh. It was different to Tom Humphreys. It was different to Paul Howard. I'm always reminded of that old saying about bacon and eggs and the difference between the pig and the chicken, and the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. So that was me in 96. I was committed. I was committed because I'd experienced it firsthand. And that put me in a difficult position, and one that really I never came to terms with, at least until another 2 or 3 years, really.
Paul Kimmage would keep working away on the Michelle Smith story after Atlanta, and you can feel how raw the issues were for him by reading his work at the time. During that 2-year period, hostilities between the two sides would break out regularly, in print, on radio, and on TV. Then the story took a dramatic twist when the news of her tampered drug test broke in April 1998. Paul remembers hearing the news from David Walsh of the Sunday Times.
Honestly, look, I'm not going to lie about this. Was I happy? Yes, I was happy. Not because it would have had massive impact on Michelle, but just for the impact on my own career and my own life at the time. Look, I can't state this strongly enough. I came home from the Atlanta Games, and I won't be over dramatic about it and say I had to run out of the country, but I was delighted to pack my wife and kids off and take holidays for the month to get the hell out of the place, because it was horrible. It was horrible. It lasted right through, having that story having people like Cathal Dermot gloating in the papers about the fact that she was going to be suing us. She was taking us to court. That has an impact on your life. It has an impact on your personal life and on your professional life. And I did not find that time very pleasant at all. And until I got that phone call from David, I'm pretty sure it was, about the tampering test, the tamper issue in April, late April of '98. That was a tough time.
And with it, a weight was lifted. While Michelle would go through a disciplinary process to deal with her doping violation, there was no process for dealing with the wounds exposed by covering this story. And some will never be healed.
I still don't forgive a lot of the reporters, and I will never forgive a lot of the reporters for the way they covered that story. And that may sound ridiculous, but here's my point. It was one thing to choose not to address the questions. It was one thing to choose to, take a certain point on the story and report on that point. It was quite another thing to start attacking the journalists who were trying to address the story. And that's what happened. We became the target. We became the target for some of those writers at the time. And I couldn't forgive that, and I would never forgive that, because that was unpardonable for me,
There was, however, some common ground in the feelings towards the Olympic Games themselves.
That was my first Olympics, and with everyone after that, more and more I found myself wondering, what exactly are we supposed to believe here? Because a lot of what presents itself in the Olympic stadium, in the Olympic pool, is literally unbelievable at times. And it's as if, depending on your nationality, the questioning is either fierce or it's relatively muted.
Look, I haven't, speaking personally, that was the end of the Olympic Games for me. I went grudgingly to Sydney, and that was it. I never went back. I never want to go back. I don't engage with it. I'm thrilled for Kelly Harrington. I'm thrilled for Paul O'Donovan and Fintan McCarthy. I'm thrilled for all of the Olympians who come back from there with a sense of, having fulfilled something, a need in them. But with regard to medals, don't talk to me about medals. Don't talk to me about, medal tables and funding sport for medals. I hate everything about it. I don't want anything to do with it. I'll never write about it. I'll never go to the Olympic Games again. Absolutely not. And that comes down to Atlanta and my experiences that week and the way those medals, the effect those medals had on Irish sport.
Michelle Smith still has her 3 gold medals and the bronze 25 years later. And as she reminded us when we asked her for an interview for this podcast, she is still a triple Olympic champion. It's in her email sign-off. But after all this time and all the scandal, do the medals mean anything?
I don't think they do. I believe she works as a barrister now. You never see her in the public eye. She's never wheeled out when the Olympics come around. Nobody seems to be interested in her opinion. I don't know where she keeps the Olympic medals. I very much doubt they give her much joy. Technically, she's the Olympic champion 3 times over from Atlanta, but technically is never what you pursue as, when you start off as a child. It's not a technical achievement you want. It's the achievement of being loved for doing what you've done, particularly in a small country like Ireland. That technical qualification that she has those medals, I would say it means very little to her. I would say it means very little to her family, because what happened 2 years after Atlanta, it just drove a freight train through that achievement.
But I think the legacy is that it's not her accomplishments. It's not. It can't be. 3 gold medals, there's a shadow over them. And no matter if you believe she was clean or not, that's what people are going to remember, that there's all this question about it.
Look, I never see her in any public forum or anymore, but I actually feel sorry for someone who's gone through that, because every time she's seen in public, people won't be saying, oh, there's the Olympic champion. They'll be saying, there's Michelle Smith who cheated. And that's the way it's framed. And you know, she will still argue to this day, I don't doubt, well, I didn't cheat, you know, and I didn't, you know, my gold medals still stand. But they might as well be tin cans now, you know, they're really worthless.
My overriding emotion when I reflect on it is sadness, you know. My overriding emotion is sadness, and that's what I've been reflecting on in the last couple of weeks, and what I'm going to write about it in the piece I'm going to write about it. It's what was lost, you know. It's what was lost in it all, and the people who are damaged were Michelle, her family, her friends, and the people who loved and admired her for what she was in 1992.
And what about the journalists in all this?
Well, the journalists can go fuck themselves and do their fucking job. You know, fuck their damn. If they were fucking damaged, then that's the least they fucking deserve. I hope they fucking woke up.
The whole story was a wake-up call for Irish sport and the Irish public. But for some of those who finished behind Michelle in Atlanta, there was also bitterness, according to Rick Morrissey.
Really, what was left in the wake of Michelle Smith, if you believe she cheated, and most of the swimmers involved do, you're left with bitterness, I think. You're left with a bad taste in your mouth.
Marianne Limpert's silver medal in the 200 metres individual medley was the highlight of her swimming career. However, the experience left her with nagging questions that are still unresolved, but she was determined that they would not define her.
And I can only wish the best for her, honestly, like regardless of what may or may not have happened. You know, I think that's all in the past, and that's all we can do. Like harboring any sort of grudge or being bitter is really, it's only going to hurt me.
I kind of admire is too strong a word, but I kind of get that Michelle moved on with her life and wants to move on with her life and doesn't want to reflect or tell us what the secret was. I mean, here we are, 25 years later. She hasn't told us what the secret was. She hasn't told anyone what the secret was. She hasn't told the coaches, anyone what the secret was. We're left to our own conclusions, okay? We're left to the Cass hearing, okay? That's what we've got. So I kind of get that she wants to move on, and I respect that. But she can't come out on Live Line and give this statement saying, I was so proud listening to Aaron Levine, and try and pretend, you know, none of it happened. And try and rewrite history. I absolutely agree that she should not be forgotten, but she cannot be allowed to rewrite history. That's the bottom line.
The Michelle Smith story was a watershed moment in Irish sport, and as difficult as it is for some to recall that time, there are lessons in it that are worth remembering, and it's a storyline that's still gripping 25 years on.
I've said, I think it's the greatest book in Irish sport. It's waiting to be written. It's the greatest story in Irish sport ever. Full point. Nothing will ever top it. Nothing will ever beat it. She has it in her to write the greatest story in Irish sport, period.
And what if one day you could convince her to tell her story? Would you write it?
What would I do it? Would I do it? Yes, I would. Yes, I probably would. Yes, I probably would. Yeah, yes, I probably would. It's not going to happen.
You've been listening to Tainted Gold, brought to you by Independent.ie's In Focus podcast series. This was produced by Kieran Lennon and Shane Brennan, with sound design from John Smith. Thanks to RTE for the use of archive audio. Listen and follow on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.